Hi everyone, today I'll be taking a look at Tiletum, which is a 1-to-4 player board game designed by legendary duo Daniele Tascini and Simone Luciani. This is the latest game in the T-series of board games by Board and Dice. This is a dice-driven Euro that takes 60 to 100 minutes to play. Now before I get started on my review of Tiletum, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer when it comes to buying games here in the UK, and if you use my link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Okay, so the game is going to take place on this rather glorious looking board here, and in the top left hand side of the board we have the action wheel where you are going to be drafting dice and taking resources and the associated actions, and we'll talk about how that works in a bit. Here we have the main map of Europe where we're going to be travelling around with our merchant and our architect. We're going to be establishing these pillars on these churches to try and contribute to these churches by paying stones and getting victory points by doing so. The quicker you do it, the more points you are going to get. And you're also going to be going around with your merchant to establish these trade houses on these different spaces here. It's going to be more or fewer based on the player count, and one of the endgame criteria is you're going to multiply your houses with your pillars for victory points. But additionally, you want to be travelling around with your merchant and establishing these trade houses in relation to the scoring criteria here. So the game is going to take place over 4 rounds. At the end of each of those rounds, there's going to be a certain scoring criteria available to you. So the first one is always going to take place in Tiletum, which is where we start here. And these variable scoring tiles are going to show what is going to score at the end of that round. So you can see here, we're going to score 6 points for every church we have built by the end of the first round. Then in the second round, we're going to score points. We've got 11 points here based on every pair of house and pillar we've got down. Then after that, we're going to score 6 points for every kind of family crest we have. And then in the final round, we're going to score points, 7 points here based on every family crest and contract pairing that we have. However, in order to be able to score those criteria, we need to either have our merchant in that location at the right time, or we need to have a trade house there. So it's really important to get there in order to be eligible to score those in the first place. Beneath the drafting wheel there, we have these 2 kind of rows of tiles that we can draft, one of which is these family members, one of which are these contracts, and these are going to refresh as the game goes on, but they're going to be eligible for drafting essentially. And below that, we've got a king's track. Now, this is going to be a pressure that you need to manage throughout the game, because passively, as the game develops, you're going to be revealing these tokens, which are going to shift you down this track. Sometimes they'll keep you still, but generally, they'll shift you down. So this is a constant pressure to keep on going up and up and up, not only because they are going to either gain you or cost you victory points, so the more you neglect it, the more points you're going to lose here, but it also is important in terms of getting this bonus tile and for future turn order. And finally, you have your individual player board that looks like this, where you have these 6 different buildings here, one of which is kind of a dummy piece. But these are going to be where you can put these people tiles in order to get their bonuses and to get potentially other bonuses as well. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. And we have this storage area for our pillars, which we can unlock as the game goes on by completing contracts. And we also have this space here where whenever you take one of these bonus tokens, you're going to put it in the storage area ready to be used. Now, this is a very strict capacity. If you have the 4 spaces filled, then you cannot take any more. Okay, so let's talk about how the game actually works. So as I said, this is a dice drafting game, and each round is going to consist of 3 separate dice drafts in player order. Now, when you draft these dice, you're going to consider a number of things. You're going to consider the number, because the number is going to associate to the resources you take and the action you take. And you're also going to consider the color of the dice itself. So let's say I took this dark 5 here, and I'll put it on my playboard on one of these slots. Now, the color of this dice is important because that is going to associate to the different resources. So you have 5 different resources in the game. You have these bricks, you've got the wool, you've got the food, you've got the gold, and you have the steel as well. Now, this particular resource happens to relate to the stone here, and it's a number 5, therefore I would take 5 resources. So the higher numbers are great if you want to stock up your supplies of a particular resource type. However, the number is also important because that is going to associate to the action. So you can see here, the 5 action at the moment is associating to an architect action. Now, because I've taken 5 resources, it means that I get the reverse amount, adding up to 7 of the action value. So you can see how I've got a strength 2 architect action. If I was to draft, say, a value 1 die here, I'd get one of these resources, but I'd get to take the scroll action here at a strength 6. If you are the first player to take a particular dice type, then you are going to take the bonus token of it as well if you want to, and you're going to put it on your storage area ready to be used at your disposal. Well, let's take a look at all the different actions and how they work. So let's start at the King's Track action here. This one's a very simple one where you're going to move up the King's Track equal to the strength of the action. So if I take a strength 4 action, then I'm going to move up the King's Track 4 times, potentially getting me more points, potentially getting me the bonus action here, and also potentially getting me first player option next turn. The merchant action allows you to move your merchant wagon around the track. So for each action point you spend, you're going to move from track to track like so, but you can also stop at these cities, and as an action point, you can choose to deposit one of your available houses like so, which is important again for endgame scoring, but also for making you eligible for scoring certain festivals. Additionally, if you want to spend an action point, you can take one of these bonus tokens from the relevant cities, again placing it on your player board like so. The architect action works in a very similar way, where you again are going to move your architect around these different tracks, and as an action point you can again take bonus tokens, but you can also place available pillars here to show that you are eligible to contribute to these churches. The character action here relates to this part of the game where you're going to draft these characters onto your player board, and for each action point you spend, you can take a different character. So let's say I took this one here for 1 action point, and just like any other token, you'll place it on your player board. Now you can also spend additional action points to place them in these buildings. If you want to place them on the first floor, it's going to cost you 1 action point, second floor 2, and third floor is going to cost you 3. Now, whenever you fill these buildings full of characters, and bearing in mind that if you place them in a building, you are instantly going to get this reward here. Like in this example, it's going to let me climb up the King's Track. But as soon as you fill the building of the same character type, bearing in mind you cannot kind of defer from that, you have to have all the same character in the same building, you're going to unlock another house to play with. Now, there are additional things you can do here, such as when you completely fill a house of characters and you spend food here in order to put one of these sigil tokens down, providing you have one, you get these bonus actions as well. And these bonus actions would be things such as deploying a house anywhere on the board, deploying pillars anywhere on the board, teleporting your architect or merchant anywhere on the board, taking resources, or taking victory points. Now, having a completed building full of occupants as well as those sigils will also grant you victory points at the end of the game, depending on how many you have done. So if you have 6 completed houses, you're going to get a massive 30 victory points. The penultimate action here is the scroll action, or the contract action, which is going to relate to this part of the board here. And much like the character track, you're going to spend action points based on the contracts you want to take. So I could say spend 2 action points to take this one here, again placing it on my player board. But there is an additional option here where you can actually convert resources to other resources. And the first time you convert, you actually get a bonus of 1. So I could say trade 1 steel in to get 2 food, for example. But after that, it's going to be a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, these contracts are kind of simple factor of the game where you are going to try to cash in these resources as a free action to get this many victory points and potentially bonuses as well. And when you complete a contract, you are going to place them on your player board like so, from left to right where these pillars sit, in order to unlock more pillars to put on the board. And the more contracts you get complete, you can get some bonus points as well. And the final action here is simply a joker action where you can take any of the other actions at this strength. When you draft dice from the board here, you could actually choose to spend 2 gold in order to shift a dice to the next spot. So I could spend 2 gold and change this 5 to a 6, for example, if I really wanted a particular resource type. And then on top of that, there are some additional bonus actions you can take, such as converting gold into resources. Like for every 2 gold you spend, you can convert it to a different resources. Additionally to that, if you have a pillar on a certain location like so, you can spend stone in order to buy and acquire these churches. So in this example, I could spend 2 stone in order to get 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points. And then I'll take the top available church there and put it in my scoring area. Bearing in mind, I can only do that once per church. As you can see, the more churches get bought, the fewer the points available are. It's also a free action to complete contracts on your player board, and more importantly, it is a free action to use these bonus tokens, and you can use as many of these as you like. So as you can imagine, if I was say to take a King's Track action, I could then spend this token to take 3 Architect actions as well. So you can end up taking very large turns and almost like steering away from what you were originally doing by stringing all these bonus action tokens together. Let's take a quick scan of the board to have a look what some of these bonus tokens are. So these ones will simply let you boost the current strength of the action you're taking. So if you're taking, say, a strength 3, you can cash this one in to make it a strength 5. You've got some contracts available. You've got straight up victory points available. You've got things such as this one here, which will let you activate all people in a certain building type. Take bonus actions relevant to the specific type here, such as taking contracts, taking jester actions or wild actions, etc. So you can see here there's a plethora of options available to you at all times. So once everybody has completed their 3 dice drafts, you're going to have a look where you are on the King's Track. If you're in positive points, you're going to get those points. If you're in negative points, you're going to lose those points, but you're also going to reset your points back to 0 if you're in the negative. So it's not too punishing in that respect. As I said before, whoever's got the furthest is going to get this reward here. And on top of that, they are going to be the first player next round. And once you've dished all that out, you are going to score for the current round's festival here. So you want to be making sure you're getting as much of those done when they come to scoring. And after the 4 rounds are complete, you can add up final scoring, which again is based on the houses you've completed, the pairings of pillars and houses multiplied with each other. And for every 4 resources you have left, you're going to get a victory point as well. And after all that's been done, the player with the most points will be the winner. Okay, so let's share some thoughts on Tiletum. So Tiletum is obviously the latest game in the T series by Board and Dice. Now, my relationship with these games has been a bit of a rocky one because it started off, or was inspired by the legendary Tzolk'in the Mayan calendar, which still happens to be one of my favourite Euros of all time. And despite that game not being dice-driven like the rest of the games in the series, it's still probably my favourite one. After that, we had games like Teotihuacan, which were a bit more mechanical, a bit more going on, but it was definitely worth the effort because it was original and some fresh concepts on how to use dice. The same applies to Kenyu and Trismegistus. Those games, a bit of effort to play, but definitely the payoff was better than the effort it took. It was a lot of fun, very brain burnery, and just great Euros, to be fair. And after that, I was a bit standoffish with what came out because it was Tawentin Suyu, which, to be fair, wasn't by the same designers, but there was also Tabanusi. Now, Tabanusi for me was when the designers started reaching too far to be creative and different, and it just became so obtuse and so counterintuitive, I suppose. It was just a work and burden to play. I'm really happy with Tiletum by the fact that they went back to basics and thought, you know what, the keyword here is edit. Let's keep it simple. We only need one thing relating to these dice, or one clever mechanism, the resource and the action, and it was all about that pit value and the colour of dice. I love that polarising mechanism where I really want these resources, but I'm not so sure about this action. Also, if I want a load of resources, I'm only getting a pathetic 1 strength action, and vice versa. Just a cool conundrum there. This is what a dice kind of system needs to be. Not too bloated, not too convoluted, but clever. I also respect how each of these individual actions are easy to digest, and none of them are convoluted or terribly difficult to understand. Take a few tiles, move around the map, etc. So I love how simple they are. However, the game really does become exciting when you start to string together those bonus actions. And these tokens are a key and pivotal part of the game. And, they can make you have some very satisfying turns where you can deviate from what you're originally doing. And it's one of those games where you think, you know what, I can't really do much here, but hang about, let's think about what the board layout is here. Maybe if I go here, get this token, then I can do this, then I can do this, and then I can do this. And you're thinking, wow, I pulled all that off with just a very simple action. And the fact that you only get 3 actions per round, which of course is, it's going to be 12 dice drafts for the entire game. You need to make every single draft count. And I love it when decisions feel meaningful and impactful and will definitely influence how productive you need to be and how efficient you need to be in relation to if you're going to win the game or not. I think this festival system is absolutely brilliant. I love games where you can look at the lay of the board and thinking, you know what, I'm going to get a church or two here, then I'm going to scrap that, move on to something else and start building towards this. Maybe I'm going to ignore these first two objectives and score big in the second half of the game because these two objectives synergize with each other. It actually reminds me of a game called Kalamala, which is one of my absolute favorites, where you have to think, you know what, I'm going to give up on this one, I'm going to completely ignore it. I'm not even going to move my merchant into that region because I do not need to score it. It's not going to be worth my effort, and I'm going to completely tunnel vision on something else. So yeah, I really love that degree of strategy, I suppose, but you have to make these tactical decisions in between to see what's going to be the net gain there. I love this king's track here. There's constant pressure to keep moving up. Sometimes you're going to get hit much harder than other times. And it's always this constant nagging pressure to get back up there and not to forsake this many victory points. But at the same time, the board is full of opportunities. Maybe you can ignore this to gain more somewhere else. I think it was a genius decision to give each player a strict capacity of 4 to store these bonus tokens, because it means you need to make them count. Sometimes you'll get tokens such as, this, where it's simply 4 points, or get some resources where, of course, you may as well just cash them in straight away. But sometimes when you get tokens like the bonus actions or contracts, you need to consider that when is the right time to use these, because they're going to be sit there taking up space and I could be using it for something else. I think the player engagement is generally good, and there is a good degree of turn angst because, of course, there are limited dice available, and you have that kind of pressure thinking, you know what, please don't take that blue 6. I really want that one. Otherwise, I'm going to have to spend a fortune of gold to get it back around there because I really want, the steal. The same goes for establishing buildings on the board, because there is a strict capacity there, and if people aren't quick enough in order to establish these trade posts where their festivals are, then you're going to have to be there physically to be there, and somebody else can just go off and wander somewhere else and they've already got that security of having a trade post there and are going to be eligible for that scoring. And there's also pressure to score the certain churches because there's great opportunities there. Depending on the stone you're going to spend, you're not going to get a massive 14 points there just for 4 stone. That's an absolute steal. So why wouldn't I want to get there first, etc. So there's loads of opportunities here, and you want to be the first to do everything. I will say, however, there is sometimes that opportunity to lose a bit of focus because you can string so many actions together and deviate from your original dice draft. It means that people sometimes they'll be taking turns that take 1 minute. Sometimes they'll be taking turns that takes 5 seconds by moving up the king's track, for example. So just be aware that can happen, and if you're playing a 4-player game and each of you has a long drawn out turn, then it might be a while before you get another one. The game scales very well because depending on the player count, there's going to be more or fewer options to place buildings down, etc. There's also going to be more or fewer dice available to draft, so it stays nice and tight no matter how many players you play with. From a production standpoint, I'm very happy with the way this turned out. I think it looks great, and I think it's very cool that they stepped away from that ancient South American theme because it was getting a bit tiresome, I suppose, and now they've opened a whole new window of options they can go down and different settings they can pursue. Physical production, I think it's perfectly adequate. I do like the way everything looks. You've got the standard board and dice, bright coloured dice here. The actual cardboard tokens all look good. Again, standard wooden components such as your little merchant busts there, your little wooden houses, and your standard kind of board and dice pillars there. Yeah, definitely everything is up to scratch. Everything looks good and as it should, and I do love this kind of throwback beige Euro feel. This is how I like my games to look and feel. Okay, so let's get in some final thoughts for Tiletum. And my oh my, what a reminder as to why Tascini and Luciani are some of the best designers in the world right now, especially when they work together. Because we did have that bump in the road when it came to Tabanusi. It was a mess of a game, let's be honest. This one is a reminder, you know what, less is more sometimes. Let's keep it simple, but let's still be clever. This dice drafting system is remarkable. I think it's so well done, and it doesn't need to be anything more than this. That's a visceral decision. How many resources do I want compared to the strength of the action? And when you layer that on top of all these opportunities of these bonus tokens, stringing stronger and stronger actions together, getting tons done with a single dice draft, that is what I play these games for. I think if you're a certain type of player, you can get lost in those actions, and the administration can be a bit much at times because it is hard to track. But hey, if you are willing to get around that and you enjoy that style of game, then I'm pretty sure you're going to love this one. It feels classic, it feels like it's going to age well, and it's just a really well cohesive and just a well-rounded game. I think it's just, in fact, there's nothing about it that I don't like, and I'll be massively surprised if this isn't a top 3 game of the year for me. I think it is that good, and I've been completely re-inspired by the T-Series again, and I'm just, they've got my trust back, let's just say that. So that is Tiletum. This is going to probably going to rank extremely high for a debutante, and rightly so, because it is just a brilliant Euro that I adore. That is Tiletum.